Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. As we witness the unveiling, the uncovering of what a lot of us have known for some time, but now we're seeing it in the flesh, in the documentation, that there is an immense amount of evil that is running this country, other countries, the institutions, and so much more. As we kind of page through these Epstein files, one of the questions that I really hone in on is what happened to this country, and what does it mean that the founding fathers, when they set up the rules and the documents and the structure for this country, when they talked about how our nation must be a moral nation, otherwise the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, everything that they put into place to protect us from tyranny will no longer work. Yet here we are, and you look around our nation, and I would say that we have fallen very far from grace as a nation. I mean, now there's still a lot of good people in this country. I really believe that. There's a lot of good people that have just been deceived as well, that need to help. We need to help them see through the lies that have led them to where they are now. But to me, this is a really important time to have a discussion like this and just saying, what is the future of this country if we can't figure out some way to get back to our moral roots and some way to bring back a shared humanity and a shared understanding of the world back into America when it has been fractured into a million pieces. And so joining me today is my good friend, Chris Prosch, who I've had on multiple times before. And we're going to be kind of having a sober conversation about these exact topics. So I hope you enjoy the show. Before we dive into it, just a few quick things. First off, if you're watching on Rumble, thank you for supporting a free speech platform. Make sure you hit that thumbs up, leave a comment. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also, every show is done as a podcast as well as a video. So if you prefer to listen, go to your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, etc., and find me on there. So let's go ahead and jump into this conversation with Chris Prosch. Chris, man, it's good to have you back on the show. I think the last time we did this was around, maybe it was the election, 2020. Was that 2024 by this point? I feel like the years have just all blended together. But anyway, it's been a while, and it's good to have you on here.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun last time. I think we were on election night 2024 for like 6 hours, just making sure no nonsense happening. And we had the pleasure of having General Flynn on too. So it was a great night.
Oh yeah. That was gosh, how much has changed since then. I feel like I don't even recognize the world anymore, which maybe that's by design, right? So we're going to be hitting on a handful of different topics, but I think that the underlying theme with this discussion is, I think, helping people assemble the toolkit, the mental toolkit to survive a world where propaganda is everywhere, and not just propaganda on CNN or Fox News, even at the influencer level, at the subtle algorithm, kind of AI-driven algorithm manipulation. I mean, there's so much, but actually there's ways to be centered to see through it, right? And I think that we'll be hitting on a lot of that. But also, you're someone that follows politics closer than I do. I've become a little more of a, I'm not gonna say I'm a black pillar, because I feel I feel really good actually, because I feel like I've just taken control into my own hands instead of relying on DC. But I do want to talk to you about midterms and just in light of everything that's happened recently, especially with the Epstein files and the complete lack of trust in the institutions. So we'll get to that, but let's go ahead. Well, before we jump in, I'll pull up your Substack just so people have it, which we'll be referencing it a few different times today. So it's PMG, which is it's at PMG100. I'll make sure that the link to it is in the description. But you've got a really, really good Substack, which is very analytical. You're not just saying, oh, the media is lying. You're saying, okay, here's 100 examples of the media being caught in a lie. And you're calling out both sides too in this, which I appreciate. But anyway, so we'll come back to that as we kind of go throughout the show. I just want to bring people's attention to it and encourage them to subscribe. It's $10 a month on Substack. It's good content helping people. Really, I think as you say here, honest questions for people tired of being managed, right? That's what it is. Like, people are tired of being engineered and manipulated. And so it's about asking these honest questions. So anyway, let's kind of dive in, or I'll let you dive into first taking a look at what you're seeing happening with the media. Because obviously we know the media is very controlled, but you're seeing patterns that many won't see. Something strange is happening with the silver market right now, and most people have no idea. Pause for a second and think about this. Why is silver up nearly 200% in the past year? Bank of America's head of metals research just released a report saying that silver could hit $309 an ounce this year. That's Bank of America saying this. At the same time, the U.S. Mint has paused silver sales because prices are moving so fast they can't keep up. That doesn't happen in normal markets. What's going on is a global silver squeeze, with countries around the world scrambling to lock up physical silver while supply tightens. And at the same time, the old paper price rigging system, the LBMA and the COMEX, is starting to crack, which means the real value of silver and gold is beginning to emerge. Yes, silver is already at a historic high, but many experts believe this move is just getting started as the paper market breaks down and physical supply gets squeezed even further. Honestly, this could be a rare opportunity to build real generational wealth, but the window's closing. Right now, Noble Gold is still able to maintain a reliable supply of physical silver at fair prices while others are running dry. This isn't financial advice. Do your own research, but don't ignore what's happening. The window is closing. So take action today by visiting goldwithseth.com or calling 877-646-5347. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 877-646-5347.
Yeah, I think that's first off, thank you for the shout out. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, we're heading into a midterm. It's there's nothing more hilarious, when Trump won in 2024, and when I'll never forget, he flew to the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, opening back up again. And I'll never forget how all the European heads of state reacted to him. It was like a king walking through this giant, beautiful cathedral, because they all wanted to be on his good side. Because now he gave the impression that he's learned from his first term. And when he finally got in office, in January 2025, almost unanimously, all the media pivoted to being nice to him. YouTube backed off of censorship, or at least pretended to. Mark Zuckerberg had that famous Joe Rogan interview where he's like, yeah, the Biden administration and the FBI coerced me, into censoring Christians and conservatives, libertarians, really anybody who was the enemy of the Biden administration, which was, probably 3 to 4 fifths of the country. But no, it's just, we're living in an age where they don't want us thinking. It's a sad day when 90% of mainstream media, Washington Post is owned by, a liberal, Jeff Bezos. Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook, and Instagram. I don't know if that's, not violating antitrust laws, or the fact that Google owns YouTube, same thing. CNN, oh my gosh, MSNBC. I mean, all these major media outlets are literally owned by major Democrat donors, and Fox News isn't much better. I mean, I'll never forget how they were in 2020. When that election night happened. I mean, there was a lot of oddities happening, but and even more recently with all the ICE protests, it's sickening to see The Hill and CNN and the Washington Post, New York Times, almost unanimously covering the exact same narrative. Because we're in midterms, they want to diminish Trump's support and power in DC, and they want to flip the House. They know they're not going to get the Senate. That's just a physical impossibility, but they might get the House by 5 to 10 votes.
And so, I mean, even looking where all this is going, I mean, okay, right now we've just had these Epstein files come out, and they are damning is putting it so lightly, the information contained in here. And what I'm seeing, though, is you're seeing kind of two sides to this. You're seeing that the Trump administration is basically saying, well, nothing prosecutable in there. No arrests are going to happen. Trump is like, oh, it's planted information. It's a Democrat hoax. And they've kind of pretty unanimously taken that position. But you also have people on the other side, even some Democrat lawmakers, et cetera, now coming out and they're saying, well, Trump's name was in there quite a lot, and there's some pretty damning things, and even some sworn testimony about, some very damning things, threats to people's family, dead children. I mean, just people can go look and for themselves, they want to see it. And I mean, I feel like it has us at a really strange crossroads, because I think that for a lot of people, myself included, it's like I feel very politically homeless right now. And it's very freeing. I like the feeling of it. It's like I am not a Republican, but I'm not a Democrat. And it's almost like I feel like even saying I'm a libertarian is still participating in that system, where it's like my view is the whole system is corrupted. And if you didn't see it before the Epstein files came out, you now see it, that it is corrupted in immeasurable ways. And so even looking at heading into the midterms, it's like, well, it's like, do I vote for this politician that's probably got, dirt on him from Epstein, or someone else, or that politician from the same, this one says he's a conservative, yet we hear through the rumor mills that he's kind of diddling boys on the side, and this person says this. I mean, I just find that, and maybe this is by design, that everything feels so chaotic, and you don't know who to trust anymore. And it used to be that you could trust the media. Then obviously that fell apart. Then it was that you could say trust your influencers you're following. We've seen a lot of these influencers have now shown to be part of influence networks and have all kinds of terrible things, kind of hidden under their rug. And so how do you make sense of all this?
Just understanding the power dynamics. If you look at, some of these influencers who are, oddly receiving money from foreign interests and foreign countries, they'll just play it off saying, oh, well, it's irrelevant from where they're at. They can be from Dubai or the UAE, or they can, be from Saudi Arabia or Germany. They're just advertisers. That's all they are. They'll just play it down. But they purposefully, even conservative ones, they purposefully bury the leads because they don't really want us looking there. But even back to the Epstein things, as well, when President Trump was campaigning for his reelection, in 23, 24, and 25, I guess when he got into 25, he made big promises of exposing the deep state, and I believe he was trying his best to keep his promises when Doge, and Elon were there, and Rasmussen, they showed strong polling that most of Americans actually supported overwhelmingly. I mean, people in America are screaming and demanding accountability. But with the Epstein files, what's funny was there was a similar poll that came out showing RFK Jr. is actually the most popular member of Trump's cabinet. Who's not the most popular member of his cabinet? Attorney General Bondi. She's not the most popular because she promised transparency with the Epstein files, and she said within 3 to 6 months. Well, now it's over a year. And she plays it down again. She says, well, there was thousands of pages of documents to go through. We had to be sensitive to privacy matters to the victims and their families. And the reality is no justice will come from it. I mean, the fact that major banking institutions like JP Morgan have paid out tens of millions of dollars already to these victims' families, and we can't know what happened, who was involved, or even the victims, because of massive NDAs they put in place for a massive payoff. I mean, it's just like I was talking to a lawyer just yesterday. The fact that Hillary Clinton is coming with her husband to Congress to testify, people are like, oh, well, we're going to get some justice here. No, we're not. It's going to be closed door hearings. And she and her lawyer demanded that she does not have to swear an oath to tell the truth. So it's like, what's the point of her even coming to Congress then? It's just going to be more of the same old kangaroo court nonsense, where the politicians will know exactly what's happening, but the people will get absolutely nothing. It's going to be a giant blame shifting.
But it's like, where do we go from here? Because if you look at this system, and let's just use the midterms as an example. And I remember thinking, heading into 2024 election and into 2025, the thinking was, okay, well, if Trump has this landslide, he basically controls Congress. We kind of stacked, right? We've got the FBI, kind of, this big shuffling of all these different key positions, right? Earlier on there was, people like Joel Salatin that was going to be advising the USDA, and Before Pam Bondi, it was Matt Gaetz, who's pretty much a firebrand. He lives up to his the name of his show.
Yeah, he does.
But if you look at where things are at right now, I mean, yes, there have been some positive things that have happened, of course, right? I think some of the kind of changes to the military and kind of pushing out a lot of the DEI narratives and all that kind of stuff. Okay, those are positive things, but it still feels like we're in the same game of just two wings of the same bird. And it's like, okay, 4 years or 8 years of your guy, 8 years of our guy, 8 years of your guy. And every single time you're thinking, okay, well, once our party gets back in, we're going to fix everything. And there was this belief that Trump was this outsider, and he was bringing people in like Kash Patel, right? Who was openly talking about the deep state and wearing his Skull Punisher shirt, and Dan Bongino, who wrote the book on Spygate. And there's this belief that this organization was not within the system, and they're going to come in and really clean house. But I'm not seeing that. And I think that a lot of Americans are feeling the same, which is why I think a lot of people are, more than probably ever before, people feel politically homeless, especially a lot of the younger generation that finally got involved in politics, got inspired by Charlie Kirk, got inspired by a lot of the conservative values. That generation, it's not like they've all become liberals. They've all just said, screw it. Like, this is a joke. All right.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's like, where do we even go from here?
Well, and that's why, I launched the Substack, at PMG 100, because I think people are starving for critical thinking. They're tired of being talked down to by, talking heads on CNN or Fox News, talking at you, telling you how to think and feel. People want to embrace critical thinking, and I think, honestly, that's the best thing we can do is, our founding fathers demanded that we are a moral and religious people who embrace critical thinking. When Alexis de Tocqueville, a famous writer, famous philosopher, came from Paris, France, and he studied America, right after our founding, he was impressed. He was flabbergasted at how intelligent America was, from rural farmlands to major urban cities in Boston. He was impressed because we all understood biblical principles and morality, and it wasn't a judgmental nation, where one voice spoke to all the regions and the states, and I think we've honestly lost that because people have gotten too comfortable. We on the left, the Democrats, they coalesce really around whatever the Democratic Party says. You do it in a very communist-like fashion. And I know that's a little strong, but when they purposefully removed their sitting president, Joe Biden, because he was plummeting in polling, and they had no election, and they just put Kamala Harris in there as their person, I mean, people were very angry about that. But on the right, it's the same thing with MAGA. Whatever Trump says, his people just blindly believe it. And, I voted for him, because of the very reason that you mentioned. He was an outsider. And there are massive differences between his first term and his second term. In his first term, nobody thought he'd get elected. And I don't even think I think he probably even had serious doubts. But the Republican Party was not ready for him. That's why they surrounded him with the worst, awful rhinos in the world. I mean, when you have Reince Priebus and you have, oh my goodness, Pompeo. I mean, you can't, and General Kelly, you can't find any more Mitch McConnell, Bush era rhinos to stymie and ruin an individual. But I will say he has learned. I would say his cabinet now is extremely outsider based, which is good. And I think his first year was very focused on foreign policy, and I think he's done a lot of good things. But honestly, he only has one big bill passed, the big beautiful bill, and there were some good components in there, but legislatively, domestically, they're behind. And people are not happy. They want accountability, and they're demanding it now. And again, heads need to roll. People need to be arrested. I mean, look at what happened in Minnesota with Tim Walz. And I know we're bouncing around a little bit, but all this matters. Tim Walz knowingly got exposed for over $9 billion in fraud. And there was some backroom deal, and they just said, Tim, we're going to make you retire, and that's going to be your fate. No arrest, no grand hearings, but you're just going to leave quietly. Kind of like what they did with Al Franken when that picture came out of him, grabbing the SNL co-stars, breasts, in some joking, picture. The party removed. and they said, you're done in politics. That's not good enough for the American people. If we did something like that on the scale of Tim Walz, we'd be arrested.
Unless you're a Somali immigrant and you're,
Yeah, exactly.
and you're running 6 daycares out of a garage. But something that you mentioned, getting into the founding fathers. I know that you've also got a lot of that kind of some of your earlier articles, which I really appreciate on your Substack, getting into, kind of like what this country was built on, right? Because that's where I think that we have to be looking at right now is what is this country? What was this country, and what happened to this country? Because you mentioned, that the Constitution, it was really in the constitutional republic, it was really established for a moral and just people. And they even say in various ways that this system that they've established with the Constitution and the checks and balances will not be adequate for an immoral nation. Like those rules will no longer save us from tyranny. And so, again, if you even take a basic glance at some of the big things coming out in the Epstein files, if there's one thing that becomes apparent, it's that there is a lot of evil in this world that is concentrated in the positions of power. And that evil is very, very concentrated in our own government, our own institutions, media companies, big tech, down to the White House. It's there. And it's not just evil that, okay, maybe they're taking some bribes on the side. It's like, no, this is evil stuff that's coming out, right? Like this is Baal worship type stuff, sacrificing children type stuff. I mean, it's serious, right? As much as a lot of the conspiracy theorists were saying, oh, we're ruled by satanic pedophiles, it's kind of hard to deny it now, right? And so, I mean, if you look at our nation and look at where it's come from, say, the 1950s, and this is something I've been really thinking a lot about. It's like, to me, like that, obviously I wasn't alive in the 50s, but I look back and I think that, 1950s in a lot of ways represent the golden age of America, right? Post-World War II, excitement coming together, land of opportunity. But I think most importantly, though, there was a shared moral fabric of this country that kept people together, kept us united. And obviously we saw in the 60s, we had a lot of communist movements coming in. We had, that's a whole kind of can of worms getting into the social engineering that came out of the 60s and the 70s. And this cultural Marxism has really eaten away at this country. And we're now a country where, I think it was one of the top issues for females voting in the election was whether or not they could still kill their own babies, right? It was like one of the driving issues was women's reproductive health, which has been, of course, I know in your Substack you cover Margaret Sanger and her origins. And so, like, looking at our country and the people that are in it, like you and I and the Man in America audience that feel very concerned about how immoral we've become and very concerned about where the country is headed. We can fix our own selves, but the moral fabric of this nation has been completely dismantled. And I don't see a way for us to really fix this. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what it means to fix it, but it's like it's so far rotted out from the core. Wait, what do you think about this?
Well, I mean, first off, I mean, you touched on so many great points about the evils that we've allowed in our country, and I don't think it happened all at once. It was a gradual steps that we chose to overlook. And again, I think I don't think our country is lost. I don't think we're there yet. We're pretty close. But honestly, I think it starts with just with our families at home. What you allow, what you and your spouse allow, and how you raise your children. Who you let them hang out with. The communities that you expose them to, how you teach them. So many times, people they get so comfortable with not asking the right questions.
Do you owe back taxes or maybe even have unfiled tax returns? Or have you filed every year, but you still keep owing? Did you retire and suddenly get hit with a tax bill you didn't expect? Or are you a business owner with messy books and a balance you can't afford? Or maybe you pulled money from your 401k or IRA early and now the IRS wants its share. However your tax issue started, the outcome is the same. Your balance isn't going down, penalties grow, interest compounds, and many of you are about to owe again for the upcoming tax year with still no plan in place. Stop what you're doing and call Tax Network USA. The IRS isn't waiting. The IRS is enforcing collections through wage garnishments, bank levies, and property seizures. They can even file without your consent. So this is where Tax Network USA comes in. With over 15 years in business, there hasn't been a tax case they haven't seen or resolved. They specialize in tax controversies and help taxpayers nationwide get back on track by resolving back taxes and unfiled returns once and for all. Whether you owe tens of thousands of dollars or tens of millions, their team has resolved over $1 billion in tax debt. They can do the same for you, but you have to call now. So they're offering a free investigation call with the IRS. After that investigation, they put a clear case plan in place to resolve your tax problem and get you back on track. This is about using your legal rights to take control before the government sets the terms for you. So do not wait for another IRS letter or a frozen bank account. Call 1-800-958-1000. That's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/MIA or click the link in the description below.
That we completely lose ourselves. We if a priest or a pastor offends us, we're just done with church completely. When we never go back. If one political candidate lies to us, we're done. We're just done forever. I don't think that's the attitude we should really be embracing. I think we should be demanding better of ourselves, better, of our communities and better of who we choose to elect. But we can be more, we can scrutinize more, and what I mean by that is, as a society, we've allowed situationism to just dominate us. The lesser of two evils argument is completely ridiculous. Like, well, yeah, Democrats are bad, but Republicans, they're okay. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, well, Democrats are just socialists and communists, but Republicans are just cowards. And at least they vote right on one or two things. That's the wrong mindset to have. We should be cut and clear in what we believe, what we support, and only support candidates who actually believe in all of those universally. Not just the idea that we have single voter issues is completely ludicrous. You're telling me you're going to vote for one politician because they agree with you on pro-life or abortion issues, but everything else you're going to completely forget about. And they do that on purpose. They do that on purpose. What was one of the biggest lies ever perpetuated upon American people was when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and there was no constitutional basis for that whatsoever. And the left would say, oh, he's removed the right for women to choose. I'm like, no, they brought it back to the states to decide for themselves. So if anything, they constitutionally let the states decide. There should be no federal, nowhere in the Constitution, nowhere does it embrace you literally choosing to kill your child. So it's just it's really fighting back against what we're told. I cannot tell you how many college kids I've had arguments with, on politics, where they're literally regurgitating whatever CNN told them, literally verbatim. And there's absolutely no critical thinking. And I urge all parents to demand better of your children and really teach them, strong fundamental morals, from a Bible believing nation, but also teaching them, how to look past the facade of lies. One of the many reasons I got out of politics after a decade was because so many Republicans were lying to me saying, oh, I'm a pro-life. I have an A+ pro-life, from these local state organizations. Yet they voted for the budget bill every year, which had funding for Planned Parenthood in it. It's just, I can't, the hypocrisy was almost too much to handle. I think people are tired of it. I think they're exhausted from being talked down to.
Well, and so I'm glad that you mentioned the church, because when I'm thinking about how the country goes from, even what it was in the 50s to what it is right now, yeah. It's like, whose responsibility is it to maintain the morality of a nation? Obviously, I think that you could say, well, it starts in your own home. It's the responsibility of the father, right? And setting the tone. It's, the mother and how the children are raised, the school and the values the schools are teaching. And we see that the schools have been taken over and whatnot. But America, you could say at one point that America was a very Christian country, right? And that it was um, really built on those Christian values. And we've seen, though, over time, right, the separation of church and state, the all the nonprofit status for churches, and all these different things, that they've been completely neutered. And the way I look at it is, I'm not a big fan of, say, religion per se, right? Because it can be used in very bad ways, as it has throughout history. But I'd also believe that a core tenet of just believing in God is believing that there are a pretty universal set of values of right and wrong, almost the 10 Commandments, you might say, right? And so, I mean, how is it that churches across this nation have, in many ways, just sat idly and watched this moral decay happen? Obviously, some of them have even been very participatory in the moral decay and pushing these agendas. And so what blame do you place on the church for where things are at in this country, that we've allowed ourselves to get to a place where we're ruled by potentially satanic pedophiles, to put it bluntly, right?
Yeah, well, there's a study that came out, that showcases, I think there's one church for every 400 people in America, and those are, in the beginning, those are great odds, great numbers, and it started, in my opinion, back in the 40s and 50s. The church allowed itself to be muzzled. Lyndon B. Johnson was a horrible, terrible, awful racist president. His own audio tapes prove that. He was a horribly disgusting president. And ironically, Democrats never want to talk about him, or Woodrow Wilson. But what's funny, though, is he got his law passed, and he forced churches to be to sign with the IRS for this tax exempt status, which ironically before that they were already tax exempt. So it was a complete redundancy. It was a legal tool to threaten them to lose something that they already had. And so that was the first step. The churches didn't do the research. They did not think, from a legal perspective, how do we protect ourselves? They just blindly obeyed. And I think that was one of the first catalysts when the church and the pastors said, they got backed into a corner and they said, don't hurt me. And then, over the 60s and 70s and 80s, pastors, if you notice, historically, pastors stopped talking about the issues of divorce. They stopped talking about abortion. They stopped talking about, homosexuality. They stopped talking. They stopped asking and talking about the hard questions. They just replaced, because a church is important. If you're going to be a Bible believing Christian in this country, people have to understand that a church is important. Especially during COVID, there was a massive rise in, I don't need to go to church to be a good Christian. Well, first off, that's antithetical to what Jesus literally taught. That's the same logic of saying, I don't need to be at home to be a good husband. If you want to go through the sanctification process, you need to submit to a pastor and those who are better learned than you in the Bible to become stronger in your faith. And you do need to be surrounded by a community where you can literally grow in the name of Jesus, if that's your prerogative of being a Christian. But so many people, when the pastors stopped asking the hard questions, fathers in particular stopped enforcing the hard questions, and I think that's where the moral decay came from. We started being okay with, it's okay, casual sex is fine, that's okay. If you get pregnant, no big deal, just have an abortion, it's okay, that's fine. All that stopped. And now we're just so okay with being lied to. We're so okay with moral depravity. It's really, it's had a horrendous impact on our nation, and even the term church and state is laughable. Like, this is a shining example of why I created, PMG, is because people have no idea what separation of church and state actually means. People have this ill-conceived notion of what they are regurgitating of lies that they've heard. Most people would say, if you asked 50,000 people in America, what does separation of church and state actually mean? It means you keep church and politics separate. That's not what it means. The founding fathers would never have agreed with that. What it meant was, when our nation was founded, when the Pilgrims came here, they were literally fleeing religious institutions and government institutions colluding against the people. At the time of our founding as a nation, King James in England, had a decree. He told the clergy in his nation what they would exactly preach on to the masses. It was illegal, almost widespread in Europe at that time, for an individual to own a Bible. It was almost widespread illegal. The Netherlands allowed it to a certain extent. What people came here for was a true separation of church and state, where the individuals and the states could implement a state religion if they so chose. Like Georgia was a Baptist state, Pennsylvania was a Quaker state, but it was illegal. And pastors in the churches could be involved in government, federally or state. They absolutely could. And Jesus commands us in the Great Commission. But the federal government has zero authority, zero, over the church. They cannot pass any laws whatsoever. And that's why the COVID era was so tumultuous for so many people, because the government, both Republicans, Democrats, both of them completely forgot their constitutional oaths, and they abused the church, they abused Christians, they abused the individual citizens, and they went after all of them hard. And they tried locking churches down, they tried locking schools down, and they succeeded in numerous ways. But the government had no authority to do so. They had none.
Yet here we are, where the government's back to, as we saw, shutting churches down for not masking or any of the, having, jab requirements. I have family that are conservative and really see things, I think, very straight, and they got injured through following the advice of their pastor, saying, "Hey, you better take this thing. It's going to protect you. It's good for you. It's going to save you from grandma. And if you're a good Christian citizen, you should do this to keep your country safe." And so, and I might push back a little bit, which I'm not really kind of opposing, but you mentioned kind of people finding a church and finding a pastor, and it's like, well, I mean, isn't a church just people that could be in your home, right? It could be just you and 5 of your close family friends that come together and study together and kind of share. Because I think that when there's this mentality that you need to go through a gatekeeper, right, or have someone who's really studied, how he got a degree in theology to help interpret these things and interpret the Bible. I feel like that's kind of been the same recipe where things have gone awry over and over throughout history, where, as you mentioned, it was so extreme before that most people couldn't even read. They couldn't read Latin, and so they had to go to the church to have the Bible interpreted for them, right? And so, I think it's good to have a strong community, and if you have a good pastor, great. But I think there's a lot of churches and a lot of pastors that have absolutely been compromised. I mean, I know that Trevor Loudon's a mutual friend of both of us, and he's covered that extensively, how much the global communist movement has infiltrated the church system.
Absolutely.
So anyway, what do you think on that?
No, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that thousands of churches across the country have been completely compromised by woke ideology. They've completely, thrown out the gospel, Jesus' teachings, the Bible. They've completely thrown all of that out, because they want attendance, because they want to be culturally appropriate. But I still believe there are good churches out there that, are Bible believing, that, lead the community, lead the family, lead the father the way they're supposed to be for the betterment of their children, really. But yes, Jesus did say, absolutely, where 2 or 3 are worshiping in my name, I am there also. But, he also wanted us to, again, go to a place for community where we can learn together. And it's not that we can't learn together, but there are numerous times in the Bible where parables are lost on us. We don't understand the meaning behind them. And we need the extra encouragement and the extra, learning from someone who actually has the background, who actually has maybe the degrees in there to really, help us understand. Because there's so many points of it, really, where people have like, I don't understand this. I don't get that. Like as an example, if I'm sitting here asking you, well, how are the 10 Commandments structured? Most people wouldn't be able to tell me. And I'd be like, well, the first 4 are about our direct relationship to God, and the last 6 are about our relationship with our neighbors, with our community. It's just like that level of ecclesiology, that level of theology. Really, you need that extra level of encouragement at a local body under the right strong pastor, under the right church who understands, hey, abortion is not okay. Hey, we take marriage very seriously here. Hey, we take child rearing very seriously here. And again, I understand in certain parts of the country, it's very hard to find that. And if you can't, then I completely, urge the finding of community where you can find it. But yeah, like I said, it's Jesus demanded us. He wanted us to be in a collection at a church. Even another example. Even if I tell you, what is the real purpose of marriage? This is another example of our analytical thinking process that are just lost. If I asked you what's the real definition of marriage, people would say, "Oh, well, I love my spouse," or "Oh, well, I got pregnant and now we're getting married."
I thought it was really about just getting a full-time cook. That was why I signed up for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Some would say that.
That's a joke, tongue in cheek. I'm a good husband. I do a lot of cooking. I change diapers. Don't worry.
But yeah, but most people forget. Jesus literally said, marriage is to be a reflection of his love for the church. The church was literally his bridegroom. And husbands are to reflect Jesus' commitment and love and sacrificial love the church, and the church was meant to submit to his authority and teaching.
And so, if we've established, going back to the founding fathers, right? If we've established that, and I forget the exact quote, I could look it up, but I don't want to take them to do it right now, but where it's basically saying that this Constitution is for a moral and just people, right? And that without that morality, there's nothing to save them from the chains of tyranny, right? And I think that to me, that is at the heart of everything that we're dealing with right now, is that simple thing, is that even if you look at it, I'm not going to pretend to look at things through God's eyes, but you look at it through historical context. What happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? What happened when nations have fell? It's like, does our nation deserve divine providence, or does it have the divine providence? Does it deserve protection? Yeah. Is it a nation? It's like, a lot of people so they're praying for the nation, but it's like, well, is our nation, do we deserve to be preserved as a nation, or has our nation become so corrupted and on a global level, this government and its arms, its tentacles have put so much immoral information out there? Like, look at how much Hollywood influences trends globally, right?
Yeah.
It makes you really reflect on that, is like, that's the crux of the matter. And so if the people that form this nation set forth this basic principle of, you must be a moral nation, otherwise everything that we're working into this Constitution and Bill of Rights will not protect you from tyranny. Yet here we are, right? An immoral nation that is struggling with tyranny, right? And tyranny from like very evil people, which we've now discovered. It seems to me the only way that we can reverse this is for our nation to become moral again. Like, you can't vote morality into office, right? You can't, that's not going to work. And so how do we, like, when you can't even agree on gender with a portion of the nation, it doesn't matter what side you're on, it's just, that's a core difference in a fundamental thing about understanding how the world works, right? But if we can't agree on those things, how can we possibly get back to a place where our nation has shared moral values again? Because if we can't do that, where do we go from here?
Again, that's a fantastic question, one I've thought about numerous times. I mean, I think it starts with all of us individually asking the right questions. I mean, my brother and I talk about this all the time. Just turn off your TV. Start reading books again. Start thinking for yourself critically again. Start asking the right questions. That's always our first step. That's the whole reason why we created PMG is for someone to please start asking the right questions. But back to your earlier comment though about Sodom and Gomorrah, or even, and I'll give you some other examples. I believed at a certain point, our nation was a strong Christian nation, and I think we still have pockets where people are doing quite well and doing it the right way. It'll never ever be promoted by the media ever. But when God was on that hill with Abraham, and they were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham was debating with him, arguing with him, like, please spare the city. If there's just 1,000 righteous men in there, please save the city. If there's just 100 righteous men, please save the city. And they got all the way down to one. If there's just one righteous man, just please save the city. And I've often thought to myself, what if that's America? What if we're slowly losing our righteousness, our ability to, because you're right. I mean, the fact that we're arguing, because, and it comes down to the definition of, truth. The left would say truth doesn't matter, doesn't exist. Truth is completely subjective. it's completely subjective off of what I feel and what I think, and I have my own truths. No, somebody needs to put on their big boy pants again and say, no, truth is objective. You can have debates about things, but there are certain things that are just, they never change. And one of them is, as an example, gender. Only one gender can have children. And the fact that we're having this debate, even today, saying men can get pregnant, that's a massive, massive lie that they're getting away with. And to force our entire medical establishment to embrace those lies is leading to so many problems. But they're doing it on purpose because they want to create more division. But I think we're not quite at the Sodom and Gomorrah moment. There was a beautiful passage I read years ago. In 1453, when the Ottoman Empire was besieging the walls of Constantinople, nowadays modern day Istanbul, there had been numerous writings about this. The level of arrogance in the city of Constantinople, the last Byzantine, Eastern Roman Empire, the last real fall, the church leaders, when the city was being besieged, and there's cannon fire, there's musket fire, people are dying. Where was the church leaders at? Where was the academic elites at? They were sitting in their cathedral, debating what color eyes Jesus really had. And I think that's where America's at. Is that we're sitting in our arrogance, asking the wrong questions while our children are being wrongfully taught, while we're being lied to. And if I push someone on the truth, they may agree with you. And even that's the saddest part too. Even people who agree with you, they still don't want the confrontation. People in America are famously introverted, where they don't want to be bothered. They don't like loud noises. They don't like someone confronting them. And even in a respectful manner, they can't handle it. And I think that's honestly the where we start. We have to change how we think, or just go back to the basics and just say, you know what, you're right. I've been, and we're all guilty of it. I've been a coward. I've let things slip, but no more. And I think it starts again with the family, with the church, with the community, and with our politicians, and sitting down and asking the hard questions. I'll never forget Ron DeSantis. He came to our church, and he's a strong Catholic, and he came to our evangelical church. I didn't pull any punches. I got up and I asked him about his donor base. And I said, why does your donor base have such strong ties to the Bush family in Texas, who wanted you to run for president? And he got very cagey, and he did not want to answer those questions in public. And I think and again, I'm not saying do it in a disrespectful manner, but that was a shining example where people don't want to answer the tough questions.
And so is that part of what you're referring to? Here's one of your articles on your PMG Substack, Faith Without Sanitization, Why Comfort Christianity Collapses Under Pressure, right?
Yeah.
He says, in an age of curated feeds, feel-good sermons, and mega churches promising your best life now, a sanitized version of Christianity has taken root, one that airbrushes the cross, downplays suffering, and markets faith as a path to uninterrupted comfort, health, and wealth. This is Comfort Christianity, a polished, consumer-friendly gospel that avoids the raw edges of Scripture. It's attractive in times of ease, but it crumbles when life applies pressure. And I love that last sentence there. It's attractive in times of ease. It's kind of like communism, right? It's attractive when things are not that bad, right? For your average kid going to school and, hey, down with the patriarchy, right? It's like, well, you see, you're going to need that, that same strong kind of redneck in your class you're accusing of being a racist, homophobic, bigot. Yeah. Like that guy's the guy that can actually protect you when an enemy is knocking at your door. So why don't you just expand on this a little more, actually, on what you're really kind of hitting on here with this particular article?
Yeah, I mean, again, faith without sanitization. I mean, I worked closely with Trevor Loudon about that. He had a wonderful documentary that came out years ago, showcasing again, a slew of churches and pastors that were really, not even being bombarded by leftism or wokeism or socialism, but just a full embrace of it. And one of the major focal points was the Southern Baptist Convention. They were taking money from foreign interest groups, from BlackRock, from numerous hedge funds. And what was happening was because, and what's funny is, for people to understand the SBC, they used to be one of the strongest lobbying arms, of the right in Congress, for Christian conservatism. But they've been so strong armed by woke ideology, and they created this subsidiary group called the North American Mission Board, where it's like a tentacle, to use your previous analogy, where they will help churches, predominantly Acts 29 plant churches, where they will help churches financially. But with that money comes strict strings of what they will not talk about, and how they will preach, and how and literally some pastors have actually gotten caught verbatim reciting the same sermons over and over again. And so it's been exposed so heavily in a documentary called Enemies Within the Church. It was a fantastic film documentary, but North American Mission Board has been exposed so heavily, and I believe like the last 3 presidents of SBC have all had to leave because of scandals. And I think the current one was oh my goodness, he was he's a famous Texas Democrat, and now he's the leader of the SBC. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. So it's the fact that they purposely put conflating figures in organizations that used to be completely unanimous in their beliefs and mindsets. But it's just, again, that's a shining example where the SBC has knowingly let in people that do not align with them at all, religiously, politically, and they wonder why they have problems. And I think that's coming down to the more and more churches. There's a big scandal 3 years ago that when all they got exposed, but we're seeing overall. And again, I know we covered a lot of things here today, Seth, but it's so important people understand the glaring hypocrisy in church institutions, and political institutions, and power structures. But I believe what's happening across this country is people are becoming more decentralized. It used to be we would fight for a community, we'd fight for our statehood, we would fight for our rights. Now we're getting so decentralized to the point where even churches, they're not affiliated with massive state groups or nationally recognized groups. What's happening is the evangelical movement is growing in America because it's a singular church by itself, minding its own business, that has no strings to anybody else. And I think it's actually a blessing in disguise. And it's the same thing in media too. Mainstream media has gotten caught in so many lies, from Jussie Smollett lies to COVID lies. It's no wonder people like you and, Dan Bongino and Joe Rogan are so popular, because we've even decentralized our media. People are like, no more CNN, no more Fox News. I can't handle it. I want authenticity. I want reality. And people are craving this face-to-face interaction. They want, again, the real questions to be asked. And I think honestly that's a big catalyst in a positive way, to address your previous questions.
Yeah, and I think that what it comes down to, you mentioned decentralization, and what I think it's why there's been such a push for the technocratic control, because the technocracy allows control even of a single individual. But that's even limited. But I think it's a good point though, the decentralization, because I think that's ultimately what we need to have happen, is that it's like, what is the ultimate decentralization of morality, right? It means I have my own worldview. I have my own principles of what is right and wrong, and I'm going to filter everything through that. I'm not going to allow a pastor to tell me what's right or wrong. I'm not going to allow the media to tell me, or a politician to tell me. I think, and that's what we need to see more of. I think that we are seeing more and more of it happening, where people are they're kind of opting out in a good way though, right? You're seeing more people moving into homesteading, into homeschooling their children, into, building family compounds, doing all kinds of things to exit the system. And I think that's ultimately what we need to have happen, is because any system, as Epstein is such a prime example for it, systems can be compromised, right? You can control 1,000 workers in a labor union by compromising the single person in charge of that particular labor union, right? You can control the spiritual views of 10,000 church members by compromising a single pastor, right?
Exactly.
And that's the problem. Is, I agree with you. Yeah, okay, so having a pastor that can help share his interpretation of certain things. It's great. It's the same thing as, say, sitting down with your friend or family and say, okay, what'd you pull out of this section right here? Which is helpful. But I think that it's about people actually becoming strong on their own again, developing their own moral compass, measuring things against that, trusting their own gut, trusting their own intuition, trusting their own relationship with God, right? And saying, whether you're looking at a politician and listening to him or listening to a pastor, always asking, do I agree with this, right? Is this what feels right to me in my own intuition? And I do think that that gives me hope, because we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah, and I think there's a lot of good people in America, actually. I think America, by and large, is a lot of really, really good people.
Absolutely.
But they've been so heavily targeted with psychological operations and propaganda that their goodness has been hidden and covered up and distracted. But I also think that as more of this information comes out and people become more aware of these power structures, they're going to naturally stop trusting the institutions and the governments and the politicians and the media even more than they do right now, which is already at a record low. And that's where we have to get to.
Well, and it's honestly just understanding reality. I mean, because you can understand reality and how things are going to happen. You can also, ask tough questions. And I kind of put it into two different buckets, like with the Epstein stuff. I fervently believe we're never going to have justice with the Epstein files. We're never, it's understanding how the political game is played. Regardless of which president is in the White House, I never believed we were going to get any justice for the Epstein files. And the reason behind it is literally because we all know on that list, probably a third of Hollywood is on that list, and there have been some names leaked online, some pretty big, powerful people in Hollywood. There's also half the media, and honestly, there's probably a third of Congress on that list. I mean, people don't understand, what would happen tomorrow if President Trump said gloves are off. We're going after everybody. There'd probably be, at a minimum, at least 1,000 people that would be arrested and arraigned. And then we'd be bogged down to probably about 15 to 20 years of endless hearings. And some would probably go to prison. Some would probably get a slap on the wrist and pay a fine. Some probably get exonerated. But I don't think the politicians want to have the next 15 to 20 years of politics dominated by endless, judicial hearings. I don't think they want to have. I don't think they want to answer for those things, and I think that's the biggest reason why we'll never know truly what happened. We won't know the victims. We won't know who was all there, because both parties and too many major institutions. I mean, you literally have the members of the British royal family on that list, and I think one of them are really going to get hit, get thrown under the bus. It's just a matter of time. But it's understanding that reality of the political, unfortunate, and I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying, sit back and ask yourselves what this would look like if everything we wanted happened. It would be 15 to 20 years of endless. I mean, you thought the O.J. Simpson trial was long and annoying for a year or two? It'd be 10 times that, and it'd be vicious, and there'd be hundreds of millions, billions spent, and it would be disastrous, for so many people, righteously, because of what they did. But then you look at the secondary part, with how the media would react, and I don't even think the media would know how to react. They wouldn't even know who to cover for. They wouldn't even know who to protect. Do we protect Hollywood? Do we protect the Democrat politicians? Do we go after the Republican politicians? Like how would this even it would create an impossibility of not knowing what they would even want to do. It's like the fabrication of these ICE raids in Minnesota. So you're telling me that Minnesota is 2.2% of all deportations across the country, and they've had all these horrible things happening, but yet 1 in 4 deportations is in Texas, and they have zero problems going on. Where's the outrage for Lincoln Riley? Where's the outrage for that poor Ukrainian girl who was killed in North Carolina? It's just you cannot. I mean, and like even that I laugh so much over the insanity. It's like, what are you guys exactly protesting? Criminal illegal immigrants who over 70% are repeat criminal offenders, but yet no outrage, no justice for the citizens who have been killed. Okay. It's just, again, so it's understanding the reality, the complex of what you're asking, but it's also recognizing the complete fabrication of that we're okay with as a society. But call it what it is. It's not news. It's entertainment.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I think that really kind of gets to the core of the issue is that we have to be able to have honest conversations again.
Yes.
And that's a big part of it. You mentioned the politeness of the Americans. It's funny because my wife, Kate, is Australian. And that's one thing I appreciate about her is that, as you know, because you know her well, she's not worried about offending you, right? If you screw up, she'll say, hey, you screwed that up. Like, that sucks, right? But I appreciate it because, like, I think coddling us is what gets us in this place where you think, you don't see the real problems. And obviously Australia has a lot of its own issues, but by and large, the Australians that I know, they're blunt and they will call you out on something. They'll pull you up on something. And that's important. So that's also, again, why I appreciate having these conversations, but why I think what you're doing with PMG is really important is because if I were to look at this and see what is the theme of this, right? The theme of your Substack and your posts and the content on there, it's that you're having the real conversation that people need to be having. But you're not doing it in a divisive way where you're pitting left against right. I mean, you're just, like you said, honest questions for people who are tired of being managed. And that's really, really important. And I also think it's really important because I think that's why a lot of people tune into my show is because they feel like, gosh, finally someone's saying something that is exactly what I'm thinking. And because people are very isolated, right? That's the other thing. A lot of people are very alone. They can't have these kinds of conversations. Maybe they've got, the one couple in their church they talk to, or there's that one uncle that they can talk to. But for a lot of people, by design, they can't talk about a lot of these things. And so there's even a lot of, I think, value in that and just thinking, gosh, finally someone that is just speaking honestly about things. That's not controlled, not bought and paid. I'll make sure that your Substack is in the description. And I really encourage people to check it out and subscribe to it and support what you're doing because we need to have more of these honest conversations. And I think that anyone who's willing to have these conversations really deserves to have the right kind of attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just, as a society, we need to start asking the right questions, and we're not. If you were not, and people need to ask themselves for their own benefit too, if you were not outraged and angry over Laken Riley being murdered, if you were not outraged over the thousands of Americans who are killed by illegal immigrants every single year, but yet you were selectively outraged over Alex Preddy because the media told you to be outraged, then you're a part of the problem. And I'm not saying you're a bad person, but you need to start thinking about things. You start asking yourself better questions, because this even in there, I have an article about selective outrage is not justice. You can absolutely be upset about an injustice happening, but if you're not equally outraged over all the injustices, then you're a part of the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. Was 100% right. Any injustice anywhere is an injustice to all of us, and it's something we need to, seriously think about, but don't react just because the media is telling you to, just because The Hill and the Washington Post are collaborating to, promote the same narrative. It's just.
I also think from that same perspective, don't think that ICE is justified in whatever they want to do because Fox News or say Tim Pool says they should be, right? It's about being objective. It's about saying, okay, I recognize that there has to be this process of removing the illegals. However, I also am watching and saying, okay, let's make sure we don't have a police state, that's developing here. And it's a tricky place. I mean, we're in a very tricky situation where it's like, okay, what happens if a state governor is actually controlled by a foreign nation and is actively working to destabilize the United States, and a president wants to use federal powers to do that? I mean, it's tricky, but it's really important though that we stay really level-headed and realize that there's influence poking at us from every single direction. There's trying to manipulate how we're thinking about things.
and I use this as an example, the whole ICE raids, because I mean, you're right, it is a tumultuous topic, but people have to take a 50,000-foot view and understand what caused this. And this is where I bash even Republicans very, very hard. And I say this problem started under Ronald Reagan when he made some backroom deal with Tip O'Neill and he legalized 3 million illegals overnight. And then Bill Clinton, and then George Bush Jr., and George Bush Sr., excuse me, and Obama, and Biden, and Trump. When we knowingly allow our borders to be wide open to drug trafficking, cartels, human trafficking, sex trafficking for 30 years, and we have normalized it so much, of course it looks weird when we're trying to enforce the laws that have been the same since the 70s. And overwhelmingly, 99% of the operations have been legal. And you're going to have that 1% of where it looks a little rough. But I would argue the 30 years that we've tolerated with Republican and Democrat presidents and their blatant obstruction of the Constitution, people should be equally outraged over that. And because I mean, and it's like, I mean, when people ask about all the stuff that's going on right now, I'm like, guys, wait a minute. Let's take a look at the 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. What led up to this? You should be equally outraged about that. And it's there's nothing more laughable than orange man bad, but it's okay when Obama did the exact same thing. We need to start asking the better.
Exactly. Well, Chris, it's been great speaking with you. We'll remind people, PMG Substack. The link is in the description. It's also substack.com/@PMG100. I'll make sure that the link is in there. Sign up, support Chris and what you're doing. Share this information, have these conversations, because you could argue that the fate of our nation depends on how we act right now, and we have to get over the politeness and the politically correct. Otherwise, fire and brimstone may be falling from the sky before we know it. So, Chris, thank you, man. Any last words as we're signing off?
No, like I said, just go there, subscribe. It's just $10 a month. We're already paying $100 a month for Hulu and Netflix. So, for an opportunity to get some real, honest, critical thinking. I mean, like I said, we love our supporters. It's only growing. Weekly commentary, videos, articles, essays, polling. I mean, it's going to be great. So again, Seth, I appreciate you. You're fantastic. You're one of the rare good ones who actually asks the right questions. but you are 100% right. Your wife is amazing and very direct.
Which is exactly what I need. I had a mother growing up that it was hard for me to do wrong in her eyes, which has its values, but it's also good to have a woman to help keep you in line. Otherwise, I'd be laying on the couch eating Cheese Whiz at midnight, right?
Well, no. The problem with you, Seth, is if you were ever a politician, you'd be called a hair candidate. So that's why everybody gives you a free pass.
What's a hair? Was that because of my hair?
Something no, a hair candidate is like a JFK, someone who's really handsome who gets a free pass in life.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know about that. I'll have to ask my wife.
Man.
All right. Well, Chris, man, it was good talking to you. Thank you again for coming on and just keep at what you're doing. I think it's a great initiative you're working on there.
Yes, sir. I really appreciate it.